Hey guys, tonight we step barefoot into the frosted rice fields of ancient Korea, where dawn light cuts across pale hills and cold winds howl like hungry wolves between thatched roofs. You stand shivering just outside your family's wooden hammock, breath misting in the icy morning air as chickens peck half-heartedly at frozen ground. Winter is not just a season here. It's a relentless test of endurance, where the warmth of food can mean the difference between life and a long, slow sleep you don't wake from. And let's be honest, you probably wouldn't last a day in these bone-cracking temperatures without a steaming bowl of something hearty in your hands. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop a comment with your city and local time so we can see where in the world you're drifting off from tonight. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step back into your house, ducking low under wooden beams, polished by generations of hands. The smell of wood smoke greets you like an old friend, curling from the hearth at the center of the room. You hear the dull thud of a stone mill grinding dried grains into powder, your family's lifeline for the cold months ahead. By the flickering light of oil lamps, you see baskets of radishes and cabbages stacked high, soon to be salted and packed for fermentation. The low burble of boiling soup makes your stomach twist with anticipation. Mainstream historical fact. Ancient Korean winters were brutal enough to inspire entire culinary traditions centered on survival. Harsh Siberian winds, known as the Siberian Express, swept down the peninsula, dropping temperatures far below freezing and keeping the land locked in ice for months. Without proper food storage, families faced starvation or malnutrition before spring. A quirkier detail you might chuckle at as you huddle by the smoky fire. Korean farmers often believed ghosts roamed freely on winter nights, so they'd leave bowls of warm broth outside the door to appease wandering spirits. Historians still argue whether these ghostly offerings were purely superstition or a clever way to share scarce food with less fortunate neighbors under the guise of folk belief. Your mother, cheeks pink from the cold, ladles out thick soybean stew, each spoonful steaming in the crisp air. She gestures for you to hold your hands over the bubbling pot, letting the rising warmth chase the numbness from your fingers. The smell is earthy and salty, promising comfort as snow gusts rattle the paper doors. You notice older villagers trudging past your house, their breaths puffing in rhythm as they carry woven baskets strapped to their backs. Their straw shoes crunch across icy paths. Some wave, their eyes half hidden by fur-lined hats. These are people who've survived countless winters, their stooped backs a testament to resilience and stubbornness against the biting cold. You slip outside to fetch firewood stacked beneath a lean-to roof. The wood is damp from frost, each log heavy and cold. You stagger inside, arms aching, and feed the flames until they crackle high, sending tiny sparks dancing like fireflies. The warmth spreads across the room, and for a brief moment, you forget how harsh the world is beyond your thin walls. Sitting cross-legged near the hearth, you sip barley tea poured into a clay cup that's warm enough to burn your lips. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen you didn't need tonight? Well, you'd trade every fancy modern skincare cream for the simple bliss of this steaming tea, radiating life back into your bones. As evening falls, shadows stretch long and blue over snowy fields. You hear wolves howling from the forest's edge, their cries carried by a moonlit wind that chills even your thoughts. Your family huddles together under blankets stuffed with cotton and dried reeds, whispering stories about ancestors who fought wars, endured famines, and still found time to teach their children to make kimchi. Historians still argue whether ancient Korean families spent more energy preserving food or preserving hope. But you sense they were one and the same. For now, you wrap yourself tighter in your blanket and listen to the slow drip of melting icicles outside, each drop a quiet promise that spring will come. Eventually, you wake to a thin light seeping through paper windows, your breath rising in white clouds above your straw mat. A rooster crows with a hoarse note, as if even it resents the brittle cold. You step outside to find the courtyard dusted with fresh snow that crunches underfoot like ground glass. The village feels frozen in time, each house huddled beneath heavy eaves as smoke rises lazily into the pale morning sky. This is the season of early harvests. The frantic scramble of autumn now a distant memory, yet its bounty your only hope of making it to spring. You slip into the storeroom, where air is heavy with the earthy perfume of radishes stacked like fat white clubs and cabbages layered like green armor. Clay jars squat in shadowy corners, holding grain carefully measured out by your father's hand. Their round bellies promise survival. Mainstream historical fact: Koreans traditionally harvested and preserved crops in late autumn, storing them in ongi, porous clay jars that allowed air circulation while keeping moisture out. Rice, barley, and millet were dried and packed away in these vessels, ensuring that families had staple grains through the long, hungry months of winter. A quirky tidbit: radishes were often hung in neat rows outside homes to dry in the cold wind, looking like a ghostly chorus of pale sausages swaying beneath the eaves. Children dared each other to touch the icy vegetables, convinced the chill would freeze their fingers solid. Historians still argue whether these drying radishes were just a practical step in preservation or a subtle village status symbol. The more radishes you had dancing in the breeze, the better your family was faring. Your mother shows you how to rub coarse salt into sliced radish strips, massaging them until water beads on their surface. Each squeeze squeaks faintly, a tiny song of preservation. You taste one piece. It's crisp, bright, and so salty it makes your lips pucker. But you smile, because you know that briny tang will deepen into something miraculous during the dark months ahead. Outside, neighbors work side by side, sharing old jokes and hushed gossip. Remember how you used to watch their hands blur as they harvested in autumn? Now you realize that speed once meant survival. No one can afford to miss a single harvest day, not when the earth soon turns rock hard and unyielding. Your father lifts burlap sacks of barley into a loft above the main room, each one a small victory against the bitter winds still to come. The beams creak under the weight, but you hear the pride in his voice as he explains how the family's careful planning will see you through. His eyes crinkle with confidence, or perhaps with the strain of hiding his worries. At noon, you sit on a low wooden stool, legs tucked beneath thick blankets, peeling the last of the autumn turnips. Your fingers grow red and stiff, but you keep going because every sliver you drop into the basin is another day you won't go hungry. Remember those flickering oil lamps lighting late-night stories? Now they guide you as you work deep into the evening, shadows dancing across the walls. Mainstream historical fact: Koreans used pits called kimchi jangdokdae to bury jars of fermented vegetables underground. The stable temperature of the earth kept jars from freezing solid while slowing spoilage, a brilliant technique still used today by some traditional cooks. A joke bubbles up as you rub numb fingers together. Modern refrigerators may hum softly and look sleek, but they lack the charm of a good old hole in the ground, lined with straw and guarded by a sleepy dog. By nightfall, the village grows quiet except for the sigh of wind across frozen paddies. Icicles drip like ticking clocks, measuring time until the next meal. You drift into sleep knowing your family's careful stockpiling has built a small fortress of comfort against the relentless cold. Historians still argue whether these early harvest preparations were rooted more in fear of famine or the joy of communal labor. But you suspect both feelings warmed hearts as much as any hearth. Your eyes open to find a pale sunrise glinting off a landscape, blanketed in snow so thick it swallows every sound. You rise quietly, careful not to wake your siblings curled like kittens beneath layers of quilts. The air in your hanok is sharp, each breath stinging your nose as you pad across icy floors. You slip outside, feet crunching softly, to fetch a bundle of firewood. From the corner of your eye, you spot your grandmother crouched over a low table, sleeves tied back, cabbages splayed open like emerald fans. Today is Kimchi Day, and it's going to get spicy. You join her by the wooden wash tub, the tangy scent of brine already tickling your nose. Together, you massage gochugaru, brilliant red chili flakes, into the cabbage leaves, your fingers turning pink as the fiery paste seeps between every crisp fold. Your breath puffs in white clouds as you giggle at how the spice stings your cold, chapped hands. Mainstream historical fact: kimchi, Korea's most famous dish, wasn't always spicy. Chili peppers only arrived on the peninsula in the 16th century through trade with Portuguese merchants. Before that, kimchi relied on salt, garlic, and fermented fish sauce for its punch. Quirkier detail? Some families believed a perfectly made kimchi batch could predict the year's fortune. If the brine stayed clear and the taste balanced, good luck would follow. Historians still argue whether this superstition was widespread or just a quirky belief among certain coastal villages where winters were especially harsh. As you wedge each cabbage into massive clay jars, you can almost hear them sigh with relief, like tired travelers settling in for a long rest. You and your grandmother hammer straw mats over the jar tops, tightening ropes so no curious rats can sneak a nibble. Then, the heavy jars are rolled outside and buried up to their necks in frozen earth, where they'll slumber through the winter like sleeping dragons. You stand by the jars, hands on your hips, proud of the rows of earthen sentinels guarding your family's future meals. Remember those drying radishes you once dared your friends to touch? Now you know kimchi's spicy crunch will outshine any humble radish when snow piles high and game grows scarce. Back inside, your grandmother hands you a taste of freshly seasoned kimchi. The first bite explodes with salty, sour, and spicy notes that warm you from the inside out, spreading heat to the tips of your toes. You cough a little, eyes watering, but can't help grinning. You sense this is more than food. It's a fierce promise to winter that your family will not yield. Mainstream historical fact: during Korea's harsh Joseon dynasty winters, kimchi was often the only source of vitamins and fiber, preventing scurvy and malnutrition among peasants and nobles alike. You glance around your cozy kitchen, noticing how the air grows steamy from cauldrons bubbling over open flames. Flecks of chili paste glisten on the wooden floor, and you realize every stain tells a story of survival. Even the cats know to slink near the hearth, eyes half closed, waiting for scraps of cabbage or a splash of fish sauce. As night falls, you pull up your quilt near the fire, savoring the lingering burn of chili on your lips. Outside, moonlight makes snow sparkle like powdered sugar, hiding the sharp teeth of winter. Remember the wolves you once heard howling from dark woods? Now you feel like you could stare them down with a single kimchi-fueled breath. Historians still argue whether the fermentation process in ongi jars was Korea's single greatest culinary invention or just a lucky accident perfected over generations. But you know the truth. Every crunch of kimchi in winter proves that survival can be delicious. You drift off to the soft crackle of logs in the hearth, belly warm, heart confident that your family's buried treasure will carry you through the cruelest cold. You wake to the scent of rice bubbling slowly in an iron pot, steam snaking through morning light as frost still clings to the window lattice. The thin, warm aroma is instantly comforting, like a gentle hand on your shoulder telling you to stay tucked beneath your blankets just a little longer. But hunger gets the better of you, and soon you shuffle to the kitchen hearth where your mother stirs a thick, creamy juk, rice porridge, its surface glistening with sesame oil and flecks of green onion. You kneel by the fire, eyes level with the pot as it simmers quietly. The porridge clings to the wooden spoon in velvety ribbons. Each bubble releases a soft hiss, a promise of warmth that seeps into your bones even before the first spoonful touches your lips. Mainstream historical fact: jiuke has been a Korean staple for centuries, especially during winter or sickness. It could be made plain with just water and rice, or enriched with chicken, abalone, mushrooms, or ginseng for added nutrition and comfort. A quirkier tidbit you overhear from gossiping aunties: some families once dropped coins into the pot on New Year's Eve, believing that whoever found the coin in their bowl the next morning would enjoy great fortune. Historians still argue whether this practice started as a genuine tradition or simply a playful way to entertain restless children on the longest nights of winter. As you eat, each mouthful soothes your throat and belly. The subtle sweetness of the grains lingers, a soft, starchy balm against the bitter wind, rattling the paper doors. Remember how you once feared waking up to a cold kitchen? Now, the warmth of juk has become a morning ritual, a shield stronger than any fur-lined robe. Your father sits nearby, carefully slicing pickled radish to accompany the porridge. The bright yellow pieces crackle under his knife, their tangy crunch cutting perfectly through the creamy texture. You watch as he arranges them in a neat spiral on a lacquer tray, a small piece of beauty that makes the humble meal feel grand. Outside, snowdrifts pile higher along the stone walls of your yard. Chickens huddle together, their feathers puffed like miniature quilts. Smoke from neighboring homes twists into the pale sky, a sign that every family is fighting the same cold with steaming bowls of their own. Mainstream historical fact: juk was so important it inspired its own set of cooking implements. Narrow, tall pots called juktukyong, designed to keep heat concentrated and rice from sticking, making silky porridge every time. You smile as your mother hums softly, a song you remember from nights when she rocked you to sleep. The notes blend with the gentle bubbling of the pot, creating a quiet symphony that makes the kitchen feel like the warmest place on earth. Your spoon scrapes the bottom of your bowl, chasing every last bit. Remember the drying radishes and fiery kimchi you prepared? Now, you understand how each piece of preserved food transforms the plain porridge into a feast. Each bite layered with memory and survival. As the sun climbs, neighbors gather in the courtyard, trading news and sharing bowls of juk topped with roasted seaweed or fermented soybean paste. Laughter crackles louder than the fire, each giggle a small victory over winter's gloom. Historians still argue whether juk began as a delicacy for nobles or a humble dish of necessity for peasants. But you know the truth doesn't matter when both rich and poor sit side by side. Steam rising from their bowls, hearts warming with every bite. That night, as snow taps gently against the roof, you dream of the morning to come, when another pot of juk will greet you like an old friend. Its warmth promising hope against the endless chill. You rise to the metallic scent of cold air that seeps beneath the wooden doors. Snow falls in lazy flakes, drifting silently past the eaves as your father builds a small mountain of wood beside the hearth. Today is the day for something special. Thick, hearty stews bubbling away in stone pots so hot they hiss when broth splashes their rims. You hurry to help stoke the fire, your breath hanging in front of you like a dragon's. The kitchen fills with a cozy crackle of burning pine. Your mother sets out squat dulcet, heavy stone bowls blackened by years of use, and begins layering bones, root vegetables, and dried herbs inside. Each clink of ladle against stone is a comforting sound, promising a meal powerful enough to chase the cold from your fingers and toes. Mainstream historical fact. Stone pot cooking, or dolsot and tutukbaegi, has been used in Korea for centuries. These thick vessels retain heat for long periods, cooking stews evenly and keeping them steaming hot, even as families gather around low tables on freezing nights. A quirky tidbit you overhear from the village storyteller. Some believe that accidentally chipping a stone pot could anger kitchen spirits, resulting in soups that spoiled quickly or even sudden streaks of bad luck. Historians still argue whether these beliefs were common or regional superstitions, unique to certain mountain villages where winters were most merciless. As you lean over the bubbling pots, steam kisses your cheeks and fogs your lashes. The broth grows cloudy and rich, glistening with droplets of beef fat or marrow that shimmer like tiny golden coins. You dip a wooden spoon to taste. The liquid is earthy and savory, warming you from tongue to toes. Remember those silky juk mornings? Now you savor each bite of tender meat or chewy rice cake hidden in the stew like buried treasure. Outside, neighbors gather, drawn by the scent of simmering broth drifting on the cold breeze. Bundled in padded coats, they swap stories as they wait for bowls to be passed from the kitchen. You notice their pink noses and gloved hands. Yet everyone's eyes shine with excitement for the feast. Mainstream historical fact. Korean stews like galbitang, beef short rib soup, or gamjatang, pork backbone stew, weren't just meals but symbols of communal resilience, often made in giant cauldrons when entire villages came together during festivals or harsh winters. You watch your grandmother carefully skim the fat from the surface with a ladle, her hands steady despite her age. She hums softly as she works, the same lullaby you remember from nights huddled by the fire. Her song weaves through the smoky kitchen, soothing your nerves even as the wind howls beyond the walls. Remember the neat rows of kimchi jars sleeping in the yard? Now they make their grand entrance, opened to reveal fermented greens that crackle with life. A crisp bite of spicy cabbage between spoonfuls of stew makes each taste even more satisfying. Each mouthful a lesson in balance passed down through generations. You glance outside as night falls, watching snow gather on frozen fields. Shadows stretch long and blue, flickering with the orange glow of fires burning in every home. The scent of hot stone pot stews drifts across the village, a silent chorus proclaiming that, together, everyone will make it through another night. Historians still argue whether these thick, bubbling stews began as royal delicacies or peasant staples. Some claim kings feasted on similar recipes, while others insist they were born in simple kitchens like yours. Either way, you know every family finds comfort in the same rising steam. As you crawl under blankets, your belly warm and your eyelids heavy, you drift into dreams of stone pots, still murmuring softly on the dying embers of the hearth. You wake to a hush even deeper than the night before, snow blanketing every rooftop in thick, heavy layers that muffle the world to a secretive whisper. The kitchen is dark, but alive with quiet work, as your mother and grandmother move like ghosts between clay jars and woven baskets. Today is the day to reveal the village's pickled secrets, quirky treasures hidden underground for weeks or even months, waiting for the cold to make them perfect. You slip into felt-lined boots and follow your grandmother to the yard, breath steaming as you kneel beside a narrow pit dug into the frozen earth. She pushes aside straw and lifts a heavy jar from its subterranean slumber. The lid creaks open, releasing a sharp, briny perfume, so intense it makes your eyes water and your stomach rumble at the same time. Mainstream historical fact: Koreans perfected the art of fermenting and pickling vegetables, roots, and fish in large ongi clay jars, often burying them underground where stable temperatures preserve the delicate microbial ecosystems needed for long-term storage. A quirkier tidbit you hear between your grandmother's chuckles. Some believed burying jars with a handful of coins ensured the pickles would ferment evenly. And more importantly, that spirits of the ancestors would protect the food from curious animals or mischievous neighbors. Historians still argue whether these coins were offerings or just practical bribes to fate. You help your grandmother carry the open jar inside, hands nearly frozen as you place it near the warm hearth. The contents gleam in the firelight. Fat slices of turnip and radish, cucumbers with wrinkled skins, and even tiny fish curled in salty sleep. Each bite of these pickles packs a sharp, exciting punch, bursting with sour and umami flavors that spark warmth in your chest. Remember the smooth, mild comfort of juk? Now, each mouthful of these pickled delights snaps you awake, reminding you of the energy needed to outlast a winter where the sun rises late and sets too soon. Neighbors drift in, drawn by the tangy scent. Everyone stands around the low table, dipping chopsticks into the communal bowls, laughter rising as they joke about who has the strongest stomach for the sourest bites. Someone coughs dramatically after a particularly pungent radish, and everyone bursts into sleepy giggles. Mainstream historical fact: pickled fish, such as salted mackerel or fermented anchovy sauce, was an important protein source during winters when fresh meat or seafood became scarce or impossible to catch due to frozen rivers and dangerous seas. As you eat, you notice how the sourness sharpens your senses, the way a fresh wind can wake you on a drowsy afternoon. Remember those bright red kimchi jars you buried? Now you realize pickles are a second line of defense. Spicy, sour, and fiercely alive. Outside, snow falls in thicker, quieter curtains, covering every footstep you made that morning. You imagine the hidden jars tucked safely in the earth, and for a moment, the world feels like a giant, frosty pantry stocked with secrets only you and your family know. Historians still argue whether these pickling traditions were unique innovations or inherited from older Chinese preservation techniques. But you suspect every cold place invents its own ways to keep the bounty of autumn alive through the dead of winter. As you drift towards sleep, belly full of electric flavors, you dream of the quiet hum of fermenting jars in dark earth, their slow magic pulsing beneath the frozen ground, promising brightness even in the year's longest nights. You wake to a muffled stillness, snow piled so high it buries fences and softens every sound to a padded hush. Today your family prepares for the winter solstice, Dongji, a day older than memory itself. When the sun stands still and darkness lingers longest, you rise quietly to find your mother boiling thick red bean porridge, patjuk, its sweet savory aroma heavy in the air as dawn struggles to break. The kitchen glows softly with the flames of the hearth, shadows playing across wooden beams while your grandmother arranges rice flour balls on a lacquer tray. Each tiny sphere, white as moonlight, represents a prayer, a wish for health, good harvests, or the birth of a child. You watch her drop them into the simmering pot, each plop a gentle note in the morning song. Mainstream historical fact. On Dongji, Koreans traditionally ate patjuk, believing the red color of the beans would ward off evil spirits and disease during the coldest, darkest days of winter. A quirky tidbit you hear from your older cousin as you roll the rice balls. Some villages used to fling ladles of patjuk onto doors and gates, painting them red as a barrier against hungry ghosts who prowled the longest night. Historians still argue whether these ghost-repelling traditions were rooted in shamanic practices or Confucian family rites layered with superstition. As the porridge thickens, you ladle bowls for everyone, each serving crowned with a soft, chewy rice balls that gleam like tiny moons in the dark Red Sea. Remember the pickles that snapped you awake? Now the creamy, slightly sweet patjuk comforts you like a warm blanket pulled tight around your shoulders. Neighbors shuffle in, stamping snow from straw shoes, cheeks flushed from the biting wind. The air fills with hushed chatter about the past year's trials, failed crops, lost loved ones, moments of joy that flickered like candles. Your mother's voice is calm and strong as she leads a quiet prayer to the ancestors, thanking them for protection and guidance. Mainstream historical fact. The winter solstice was also a time to update family genealogies, inscribing births, deaths, and marriages into meticulously kept records. A way to ensure that even in the deepest night, one's roots remained clear and unbroken. You listen to the soft murmur of older villagers recalling stories of winters so cold rivers froze solid enough to walk across. Someone swears he saw a tiger once, slinking through the pines on a night like this. Remember the wolves you heard howling in your first nights of winter? Now, the idea of a tiger prowling through snow feels less like terror and more like the wild heart of nature reminding you who's in charge. As you spoon the last of your patjuk, the thick porridge coats your mouth with earthy warmth, each bite grounding you in traditions that stretch backward through countless winters. The rice balls yield softly between your teeth, their simple sweetness, a silent promise of hope in the months still to come. Historians still argue whether dongji rituals emerged purely from agricultural cycles or were borrowed from older Chinese customs. Yet, as you gaze into your empty bowl, you sense the comfort of knowing these foods connect you not just to your family, but to everyone who ever waited for the sun's slow return. That night, you lie in bed, listening to the slow drip of melting icicles, the moon a thin coin hanging in the frozen sky. You dream of red beans, round rice balls, and the quiet strength of those who stood firm through countless winters before you. You open your eyes to a morning so cold the air feels like it might shatter if you breathe too hard. A pale sun hangs low in the sky, barely able to chase away the icy mist that curls along the village alleys. Today you'll help your father prepare hearty meats, precious cuts of pork, beef, and wild game that will be smoked, cured, or braised to fortify your family through the coldest stretch of winter. In the courtyard, your father sharpens his cleaver on a stone worn smooth by decades of use. He works with a quiet determination, breath rising in soft plumes as he slices thick slabs of pork belly and lays them on a rack to air dry in the crisp wind. The meat glistens, marbled with fat that promises rich, warming stews. Mainstream historical fact: in ancient Korea, pork was a crucial protein during winter months. Many households raised pigs specifically for late autumn slaughter, preserving every part of the animal to stretch supplies until spring. A quirky tidbit you overhear from your uncle: some hunters believed game meat should only be salted on days when crows didn't cry at dawn. Otherwise, the meat would sour before it could cure. Historians still argue whether these superstitions had real merit or were just desperate hopes for good luck during brutal winters. You help your father rub salt and crushed garlic into pork hocks, the coarse grains scraping under your numb fingers. The meat will hang in the eaves, protected by layers of straw and smoke that drift from the kitchen chimney. Remember the steaming juk you savored in early mornings? Now, you realize that a bite of tender, savory meat can warm you even deeper. Its fat, a secret source of courage. Inside, your mother sears chunks of beef in a heavy pot until they hiss and brown, the kitchen filling with a deep, mouth-watering aroma. She adds radish, garlic, and splashes of soy sauce, building layers of flavor that seep into every fiber of the stew. You watch each bubble rise slowly to the surface, bursting with a rich scent that wraps around you like a thick blanket. Mainstream historical fact: dishes like galbijam, braised short ribs, and bossam, steamed pork belly, were often reserved for celebrations, but became vital in winter, when dense, protein-rich meals helped families retain body heat and energy. Neighbors arrive, drawn by the smell drifting beyond your courtyard walls. They bring jars of preserved pickles, bowls of fresh kimchi, and handfuls of garlic to add to the feast. Remember the first time you realized how food brings people together? Now, the low table in your kitchen feels like the heart of a small, determined army gathered to survive the night. You take a bowl of steaming pork broth outside and sip it carefully. The hot, oily liquid coats your throat, sending waves of warmth through your chest, out to your fingertips and toes. The world beyond the village seems less frightening with each swallow. Historians still argue whether pork's central role in Korean winter cuisine was driven by taste or necessity, since pigs were easier and cheaper to raise than cattle. But you don't need history books to know that nothing chases away the bitter cold like a piece of succulent, smoky pork. As darkness falls, lanterns bloom along snowy streets, their soft yellow light shimmering on white drifts. The village quiets, and your family huddles together, sharing meat and laughter that echoes softly into the night. You fall asleep with the scent of braised beef still clinging to your hair. Dreams filled with hot kitchens and the comforting glow of flickering firelight. You stir beneath your quilt to the sharp, clean scent of sea air drifting inland on a cold morning breeze. Though snow still clings stubbornly to the village roofs. Today your family's focus turns to the bounty of the ocean. Dried seafood, those salty, umami-rich treasures hauled in from frigid winter waves, then preserved until they could crackle between your teeth like crunchy jewels. You follow your father to the storage shed, where bundles of dried pollock hang from beams, their pale bodies stiff and rattling faintly like wooden chimes in the draft. He hands you a piece, and you tear off a strip with your teeth. The flavor bursts with a briny sharpness that tastes like the very soul of the sea, instantly waking you from sleepy fog. Mainstream historical fact: dried pollock, hwangtae, was one of Korea's most important winter staples, with whole coastal communities relying on the harsh cold of January and February to freeze-dry fish on tall racks. These fish could keep for months, providing crucial protein during times when fresh catches were impossible. A quirky tidbit you hear from a fisherman passing through the village. Some believed hwangtae dried best under the gaze of a crescent moon, which was thought to keep evil spirits from souring the flesh. Historians still argue whether this lunar superstition came from Buddhist influences or older animist traditions honoring the sea's whims. Inside, your mother toasts dried squid strips over the fire, the flesh curling and darkening until it releases an irresistible roasted scent. You chew the hot, leathery pieces slowly, savoring the way they soften in your mouth. Each bite a burst of ocean richness. Remember the creamy juk and spicy kimchi? Now you realize how dried seafood adds an intense kick to any meal, like a secret handshake with the waves. Neighbors bring their own sea treasures: plump dried anchovies, chewy cuttlefish, and boxes of tiny salted shrimp. These ingredients find their way into bubbling soups or crunchy side dishes that keep your family's table alive with flavors of places far beyond the mountains hemming in your village. Mainstream historical fact: dried seafood was so prized it often served as a form of tax payment or tribute to regional lords during the Joseon dynasty, cementing its status as both sustenance and symbol of prosperity. The kitchen becomes a symphony of sizzling, snapping, and popping as dried fish meets hot oil. Fragrant plumes rise above the hearth, drawing children who giggle at the crackling sounds. You and your cousins compete to see who can hold a strip of roasted pollock closest to the fire without flinching from the heat. Remember the fierce burn of kimchi? Now the mellow, deep saltiness of dried seafood balances that heat perfectly. Each bite a reminder that winter meals are meant to dance between extremes: fiery, mild, crisp, tender. Historians still argue whether Korea's tradition of drying seafood in winter developed purely from necessity or as a culinary art form passed down through generations of coastal families. But as you watch your grandmother drop handfuls of dried anchovies into a pot of boiling radish soup, you see how necessity and art can become one. As night descends, waves crash distantly against icy shores, the sound reaching even your inland village like a lullaby. you drift off with the taste of the sea still lingering on your tongue, dreaming of moonlit fishing boats rocking on black waters, their lanterns bobbing like tiny stars. You wake to the brittle crack of ice breaking underfoot outside, each step of early risers echoing through silent streets. The village feels hushed, as if even the wind pauses to listen to the quiet simmering inside your kitchen, where your grandmother has already set clay pots on the hearth for another winter tradition, brewing warm, medicinal teas and tonics that promise to chase away the damp chill clinging to your bones. Steam rises as she stirs a dark, syrupy concoction made from jujubes, ginger, and cinnamon. The aroma coils around you, spicy and sweet, a scent so comforting it almost convinces you that the sun is shining and the ground isn't frozen solid. Mainstream historical fact: Korea has long embraced medicinal brews like sujongwa, cinnamon punch, and sangangcha, ginger tea, valued for their warming properties and believed to strengthen the body against harsh winters and lingering sickness. A quirky tidbit you hear as your grandfather chuckles softly into his tea. Some elders claim the only way to make these tonics truly effective was to brew them at midnight during the new moon, when yin energy reached its peak, ensuring balance in the drinker's body. Historians still argue whether such timing rituals reflected deep spiritual beliefs or were simply creative excuses for staying up to share stories. You wrap your hands around a hot ceramic cup, feeling the warmth seep into your stiff fingers. The first sip burns just enough to send shivers of relief down your spine, the ginger's sharpness melting into the honeyed sweetness of dried jujube slices. Remember the sharp snap of pickled radish? Now, the velvety smoothness of this tea feels like the gentlest blanket you've ever pulled across your shoulders. Neighbors trickle into your home, pale with cold, their voices low and grateful as they accept mugs filled with steaming brews. You watch their cheeks pinken with each sip, eyes brightening as the warmth travels deep into their chests. The room hums softly with murmured stories of harsh winters past, tales of bandits defeated by village guards, and prayers whispered for the safety of sons sent to distant markets. Mainstream historical fact: tonics brewed from ginseng, dried mushrooms, and herbs were central to Joseon dynasty medicine, prescribed by court doctors and folk healers alike, believed to boost resilience against the season's deadly chills. Outside, snow begins to fall again, thick and lazy. The white flakes catch on villagers' hats as they carry tea home in clay jars, stoppered with cloth. Children dart through drifts, cheeks flushed, their laughter ringing bright against the low rumble of wind. Remember the bright crunch of kimchi and the soothing porridge of early mornings. Now you understand how these hot tonics complete the circle of winter survival, nourishing not just the body, but the spirit. Your grandmother pulls you close, her hands warm and dry. She shows you how to add slivers of dried pear to the pot for extra sweetness, a trick she learned from her own grandmother. As you watch the thin slices sink into the dark liquid, you feel a thread connecting you through centuries of careful, loving preparation. Historians still argue whether these brews had measurable medicinal value or relied on the placebo effect of comfort and ritual. But as you feel strength returning with every swallow, you know belief can warm you as powerfully as any fire. That night, you fall asleep to the soft drip of melting snow outside, your dreams filled with swirling steam, the slow swirl of herbs in dark tea, and the quiet hum of voices telling stories into the long winter night. You rise before dawn, shivering in the darkness as the village still sleeps under a quilt of snow. Today you will make noodles, simple strands of wheat or buckwheat dough that, in these frozen months, become soft ropes of comfort, stretching like warm promises across steaming bowls. You knead the dough beside your mother, palms pressing rhythmically as flour puffs up like ghostly clouds in the frigid morning air. The kitchen fills with a soft slap of dough hitting the board. You watch your mother slice the pale mass into long, thin ribbons, her knife flashing in the lamplight. She hangs the strands across wooden rods balanced between stools, and you marvel at how the noodles sway gently, like rows of tiny laundry catching whispers of warmth from the nearby fire. Mainstream historical fact: handmade noodles such as guksu or naengmyeon were staples in Korean households, especially in times of celebration or winter hardship, when carbs were needed to fuel long days in icy fields. A quirky tidbit you overhear from your grandmother, eyes crinkling with mischief. Some villagers swore that if a noodle broke while boiling, it was a sign that the coming year would be unlucky or marked by family quarrels. Historians still argue whether this belief came from imported Chinese traditions or emerged independently among Korean farming families seeking control over fate. You help lower fresh noodles into a roiling pot of broth made from dried anchovies, kelp, and radish. The steam rushes to greet you, so thick it curls your hair and warms your chilled ears. Remember the fire-crackling stews of earlier nights? Now, the clear, briny broth of noodle soup tastes like winter's most soothing secret. The long strands slide around your chopsticks as you lift them to your mouth, hot and tender. The first mouthful melts away the night's lingering cold, each slurp echoing softly in the quiet kitchen. Your father adds a spoonful of pickled radish on the side, its tangy crunch a bright spark against the noodle's gentle comfort. Mainstream historical fact: buckwheat noodles were favored in mountainous regions like Gangwon Province, where wheat struggled to grow, but buckwheat thrived even in poor soil, becoming an essential winter food. Neighbors arrive, cheeks red from early morning chores. They gather around the low table, bowls steaming, trading stories of long winters past, tales of wolves stealing chickens or unexpected blizzards trapping travelers in the mountains for days. Remember the sweet, rich meat of your last meal. Now you savor how these humble noodles offer a different kind of warmth. Simple, sustaining, quietly joyful. Children slip through the door, their mittens flopping as they reach for noodles with eager hands. Giggles bounce around the room as they twirl strands longer than their arms. For a few moments, laughter rises higher than the cold can reach. Historians still argue whether winter noodle feasts began as ceremonial foods marking lunar festivals or as spontaneous village gatherings to share flour during lean months. You suspect it was both. Practicality woven together with celebration, because food has always been the best way to hold people close. As afternoon light fades, you gather the last of the dough scraps to feed to the chickens huddled in the shed, their soft clucking a grateful soundtrack to your efforts. You drift off that evening with the taste of broth still lingering on your lips, dreaming of endless strands of noodles stretching into a future where the warmth of shared meals never fades. You wake to a morning as pale as cold rice milk, the sun's hesitant rays peeking through drifting snowflakes. Today, your mother promises a treat sweeter than the icy world outside. Rice cakes and honeyed nuts, delicacies that make then even the longest winter night feel like a festival. You rise eagerly, slipping into layers of warm clothes as the kitchen crackles with the sounds of stone mortars pounding sticky rice into soft, elastic dough. You kneel beside your mother, hands dusted with fine rice flour, as you help shape the steamed, chewy dough into plump rounds. She presses a dent in each piece, filling them with sweet red bean paste before rolling them smooth. The cakes glisten like polished pebbles, lying neatly on woven mats ready to cool. Mainstream historical fact: rice cakes, or tteokki, have been central to Korean celebrations and everyday meals for centuries, with regional varieties that include steamed, pounded, or pan-fried styles enjoyed throughout the year, especially during cold months. A quirky tidbit you overhear as your grandmother ties her apron. Some villagers believe tteok must be shared with neighbors on certain lunar dates or risk offending kitchen spirits, who might then spoil the family's stored food. Historians still argue whether this was a widespread tradition or a custom unique to tight-knit mountain hamlets, where winters bred both superstition and strong community ties. You help roast walnuts and pine nuts over a small brazier, their shells popping as they darken. The rich, toasty scent fills the kitchen, mixing with the delicate perfume of fresh tteok. Remember the fiery kimchi and salty dried fish of earlier meals? Now you discover how sweetness shines brightest when the world is at its darkest and coldest. Your siblings gather around, eyes wide as your mother drizzles warm honey over bowls of roasted nuts. Each drop of amber syrup catches the light, sticky threads stretching from ladle to dish. You laugh quietly as your youngest brother tries to lick stray droplets from his mittened hands. Mainstream historical fact: Korean royal courts often presented elaborate tteok platters during midwinter ceremonies, with colors and patterns meant to symbolize health, fortune, and longevity. Traditions that trickle down into common kitchens, inspiring simpler but equally heartfelt versions. Neighbors arrive bearing small baskets of dried persimmons, candied chestnuts, or steamed sweet potatoes to add to the shared table. Everyone sits shoulder to shoulder, dipping rice cakes into bowls of warm cinnamon punch. Their smiles soft and sleepy as stories drift lazily around the fire. Remember the sharp, bracing flavors of kimchi or fermented pickles? Now, each bite of chewy tteok offers a slow, calming sweetness that lingers, a gentle reassurance that not every winter survival tactic must be sharp-edged. As evening cloaks the village in blue shadows, lanterns flicker in every window. The night air sparkles with frost, but inside your kitchen, warmth rolls out like a gentle tide, carrying the scent of honey and toasted nuts to every corner. Historians still argue whether these midwinter sweets were luxuries limited to wealthier families, or if creative, frugal cooks across the peninsula found ways to craft treats from humble stores of rice and forest nuts. But you know in your bones that winter's hardest days feel lighter when a shared dessert brings people together. You slip under thick quilts as the moon rises, stomach full, eyelids heavy, dreaming of tables bright with white rice cakes and golden honey. The quiet joy of sweetness in the heart of the longest night. You wake to the smell of wood smoke seeping into every beam of your house, mingling with the sharp scent of frost still clinging to the world outside. Today you and your father will work in the clay oven, an old squat dome built with thick earthen walls that radiate heat for hours. You slip into boots hardened by days of snow and trudge into the courtyard, where the oven crouches like a slaved bear beneath a layer of fresh powder. Your father slides open the heavy stone door, releasing a blast of heat that fogs your eyelashes. He shows you how to feed the fire with thin pine branches, each hiss and crackle of sap a cheerful greeting to the bitter morning air. The oven's walls glow orange as flames lick the curved ceiling, promising a day of warmth and the toasty aroma of breads and chestnuts. Mainstream historical fact: Koreans have baked breads and roasted chestnuts in clay ovens, gamasot or agungi, for centuries, relying on these versatile stoves, not only for cooking, but also for heating homes during bone-cold winters. A quirky tidbit you hear as your father tosses a handful of chestnuts into the embers. Some villagers claim the first chestnut to split open with a clear crack foretold a healthy, prosperous new year, while a muffled pop was considered a warning of trouble ahead. Historians still argue whether these omens came from practical observation of harvest patterns or simply grew from the long, anxious nights of winter. You need small loaves of barley bread, hands warm and sticky as dough stretches and folds beneath your palms. The oven's hot breath dries sweat on your cheeks as you set the pale loaves on thick oak planks to rise near the fire's edge. Remember the silk-smooth soups and stews of earlier days? Now you savor the earthy thrill of baking, the crack of crust as it browns, the soft crumb yielding to your teeth. As the bread bakes, your father scoops roasted chestnuts from the coals, skins charred and peeling to reveal sweet, steaming meat. You blow gently on each piece, laughing when the hot nuts burn your fingers. Their soft texture and buttery flavor fill you with a warmth so deep it seems to spread from your belly straight into your bones. Mainstream historical fact: roasted chestnuts were not only a popular winter snack, but a crucial calorie source, especially during times of famine when families relied on foraged foods like acorns, chestnuts, and wild greens to stretch meager stores of rice and grains. Neighbors wander over, drawn by the scent of fresh bread and the gentle crackle of the clay oven. They trade jars of pickled mustard greens or bottles of homemade rice wine for a loaf or a handful of chestnuts. Remember the early morning spent massaging salt into radishes. Now you understand how sharing the bounty of the oven weaves bonds stronger than any rope. The kitchen grows lively as baskets of roasted chestnuts pass from hand to hand. Children run outside, cheeks pink, squealing when chestnuts are too hot to hold. Adults sip warm rice wine, voices low and contented as the oven's heat reaches even the farthest corners of your home. Historians still argue whether clay ovens spread to Korea from Chinese kilns or emerged independently as farmers learned to harness clay's remarkable ability to store heat. But tonight, as you watch flames die to glowing embers, you know there is magic in the simple power of fire meeting earth. You drift into sleep with the scent of smoky chestnuts lingering in your hair, dreams filled with crackling hearths and soft bread shared under pale winter stars. You wake to the faint creak of doors opening along the village lane, the sun climbing slowly over rooftops dusted with fresh snow. Today, you help your mother gather parcels of kimchi, roasted chestnuts, and hand-rolled noodles, wrapping them tightly in cloth before heading out with her into the brittle morning air. You trudge door to door, arms heavy with bundles, as she knocks softly on neighbors' gates to share the fruits of your family's winter kitchen. The old woman next door greets you with a shy smile, cheeks wrinkled like the folds of your steamed dumplings. She hands you a jar of pickled fern stems, cold glass slick with frost, a humble but precious exchange in these unforgiving months. You realize food here is more than sustenance. It's the language of survival, the currency of kindness. Mainstream historical fact: Korean winters historically saw intense neighborly cooperation, with families exchanging preserved foods and fresh batches of kimchi to ensure no one went hungry, a tradition rooted in communal farming culture. A quirky tidbit you hear from a grandfather leaning on his cane. He swears that sharing the first scoop of newly made kimchi guarantees good health for both families, while refusing to share brings bad luck that sours even the tastiest dishes. Historians still argue whether this belief arose purely from Confucian ideals of harmony or from the harsh reality that isolation could spell disaster in winter. You watch your mother's face soften each time someone accepts her offering with a deep bow. Remember the solitary patience of burying kimchi jars. Now you see that true winter strength comes from these moments of connection, not just the food stored underground. Inside a neighbor's kitchen, you sip steaming barley tea poured with shaky hands by a widow who lost her husband 2 winters ago. She insists on feeding you sweet rice cakes filled with red beans, each bite sticky and comforting, like an edible reminder that grief can be softened by shared warmth. Mainstream historical fact. Sharing food during the harshest season wasn't merely kindness. It was a practical strategy that let communities pool resources when shortages hit, spreading risk and ensuring even the weakest households survived until spring. Snow crunches beneath your boots as you continue your rounds, the icy air sharp in your lungs. Laughter rises over fences, mixing with the soft shuffle of straw shoes. You glimpse families carrying steaming bowls between houses, the glow of oil lamps turning windows into golden squares against the blue twilight. Remember the crackling hearths of your own home? Now, standing in neighbors' kitchens, you find every hearth reflects yours, each fire part of a larger web of warmth holding your village together through the cruelest nights. As darkness settles, you return home, arms empty but heart full. The kitchen welcomes you with scents of simmering stew and familiar voices. Neighbors gather, their gifts heaped on your low table. Bundles of dried greens, jars of sweet syrups, hand-carved spoons. You sense a wordless promise in these offerings, that no matter how fierce the wind howls, no one will face it alone. Historians still argue whether such exchanges began as formal village obligations or blossomed organically from human hearts clinging to hope. But tonight, as you drift to sleep listening to the low murmur of friends talking over hot tea, you know these gifts carry more warmth than any fire. You wake to the hush of dawn breaking over fields still wrapped in snow's quiet embrace. Frost etches delicate patterns across your window pane as you sit up. Quilt slipping from your shoulders, the first hints of sunlight glinting off rooftops like shy jewels. Today, you find yourself reflecting on all the flavors, rituals, and stories that have carried your family and village through countless winters, on how these meals have become more than mere survival, but lasting legacies woven into the heart of Korean culture. You help your grandmother open one of the last buried kimchi jars. The spicy, tangy aroma explodes into the cold kitchen air. So familiar now, it feels like an old friend. She laughs softly, remembering how she learned to pack cabbages as a child beside her own mother. You realize that each meal you've shared this winter links you to generations who once stood shivering at dawn, determined to feed their families against howling winds. Mainstream historical fact: the techniques of fermenting, pickling, drying, braising, and stewing that kept ancient Koreans alive through brutal winters evolved into cornerstones of today's Korean cuisine, celebrated around the world for bold, layered flavors that balance spice, sourness, and umami. A quirky tidbit you hear from your grandfather as he slowly sips hot ginger tea. Some aristocratic families used to stamp their clan emblem into rice cakes with brass molds, turning even simple sweets into miniature family crests. Historians still argue whether these decorated TTEOK signaled social status or simply reflected pride in culinary artistry. Outside, neighbors gather for a final midwinter feast, spreading bowls of simmering stews, piles of fresh kimchi, plates of roasted chestnuts, and stacks of chewy rice cakes. Remember the warm mornings of juk? The pickle's sharp bite, the dried seafood's briny snap. Now, every flavor returns in one last celebration, layered like the folds of winter itself. You watch younger children chasing each other across snowy courtyards, eyes bright and cheeks red, unaware of how carefully their parents and grandparents planned each meal to keep them laughing through months of darkness. You hear old stories retold, of ice-cracked rivers, wolves at the village edge, and the first shoots of spring finally piercing melting snow. Mainstream historical fact: many dishes now considered Korean national treasures began as humble winter recipes born of necessity, perfected by centuries of trial, error, and love, passed quietly from one kitchen to the next. As night falls, oil lamps flicker on, one by one, casting soft pools of light that seem to warm even the snow. Families toast with rice wine, clinking cups over low tables as they trade plans for planting once the earth thaws. You realize that what's been stored all along isn't just cabbage or grain, but resilience itself. Generations of wisdom teaching how to endure, adapt, and find joy even as bitter winds blow. Remember the first morning you woke to frozen floors and feared the cold might swallow you? Now, you understand how winter isn't something to be survived alone, but a season conquered together, meal by meal, laugh by laugh, story by story. Historians still argue whether these traditions grew stronger under hardship or simply survived in spite of it. But as you drift off beneath your quilt, heart full and body warm, you know the truth. Each winter meal is a legacy, every shared bowl a quiet promise that spring will come. And until then, you'll carry the taste of courage in every bite. As our journey comes to a gentle close, imagine yourself standing in the quiet village square beneath a midnight sky, stars winking through the blackness like distant lanterns. The air is so still you can hear the soft crunch of snow beneath your feet, the slow sigh of smoke rising from chimneys, the heartbeat of a world wrapped in calm. You feel the lingering warmth of every meal you've shared, each spoonful of steaming porridge, each crisp bite of kimchi, each sweet, chewy rice cake. All flavors that carry stories older than the mountains ringing your village. Let your breath deepen as you picture rows of sleeping jars tucked in the earth, the moonlight painting their rounded tops with silver. Remember the comforting weight of your grandmother's hand on yours as you helped knead dough or ladle hot stew. How laughter and simple acts of care turned the darkest nights into moments of quiet joy. Feel the softness of worn quilts against your skin, the hush of snow muffling the world outside, the hush of peace settling inside you. Allow the images of hearty stews, smoky chestnuts, and spiced teas to fade into a gentle blur, like dreams floating beyond the last flicker of a dying lantern. Know that even in the longest winter, warmth waits within, carried in recipes passed from heart to heart, promising light will always follow darkness. Tonight, drift deeper into the quiet. Let the sounds of a softly breathing world lull you. And rest knowing you're wrapped in stories of survival, love, and hope. Sweet dreams.